Hello, I'm Deborah Chieli, a nationally board certified nurse practitioner with specialty certification in lifestyle medicine.
And I'm Susie Spell, a nationally board certified nurse practitioner, also certified in lifestyle medicine.
The following interview was part of a series that informed our presentation at the 2023 Annual Conference of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, ACLM, titled Nurses in Action, How Nurses Operationalize Lifestyle Medicine in Modern Settings, and You Can Too.
In this series, nurses from diverse backgrounds and practice settings and their champions tell their personal and professional stories about discovering lifestyle medicine and how they're implementing it across a wide range of settings.
Nurses are the largest health profession in the United States and globally and have been voted the most trusted profession here in the U.S. for over 20 years. Learning about and incorporating the pillars of lifestyle medicine fosters full scope of practice and the ability to answer the call to lead by the National Academy of Medicine with their report, Future of Nursing 2020 to 2030, Charting a Path to Achieve Health Equity.
We hope these stories of success will inspire conversation and drive creative solutions to better address inequities in healthcare. Continued growth of nursing expertise in lifestyle medicine will expedite our nation's ability to address the public health emergency of chronic lifestyle diseases we currently face.
The power of nurses to create innovative solutions when combined with the practice of lifestyle medicine allows nurses to express their full potential while simultaneously addressing the salient issues of health equity, the epidemic of chronic disease, and the provision of truly patient-centered whole-person care.
When nurses are empowered to lead with an interdisciplinary and multi-sector practice, they answer the call of the National Academy of Medicine to dissolve barriers to care and improve health for themselves, the nation, and every global citizen. Enjoy the interview. Okay, today's guest is Stephanie Crosier, a master's prepared registered dietitian and nutritionist and owner of Crosier Health and Wellness in Jacksonville, Florida. For almost 30 years, Stephanie has been dedicated to helping people of all ages optimize their health and wellness, as well as mitigate health conditions. And I first met Stephanie in 2013 when we both worked at Nemours Children's Clinic in Jacksonville. And when she told me she was a vegetarian, I declared, I'll never do that. And now I know the benefits of a vegetarian and a whole food plant-based diet and really try to incorporate that into my own life. And her and I have had a nice relationship since then. So currently, she manages a small group of dietitians that care for people with developmental disabilities living in either group homes or intermediate care facilities. And while she loves this work, she's also passionate about bringing healthy eating to everyone through her business, Crosier Health and Wellness. She's also very passionate about childhood nutrition. She's a great teacher. Her non-judgmental, fun, and down-to-earth approach is what endears her to so many. She shares her own story, provides info about nutrients. She offers tips and tricks and practical strategies to level up your nutrition game, no matter where you are in your journey. And she really walks the talk. She's always learning and growing. And she collaborates with many other health professionals. She's always very generous with her time and in the way in which she shares with her community. So welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very excited. Of course, you're my friend, but you're also my colleague. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. And what we like to start with is an origin story. So we'd like to hear about how you even discovered nutrition in the first place, why you're passionate about it, and how you discovered or why you would want to become vegetarian or whole food plant-based, passionate about that in particular.
It's interesting. I know people always ask me my story of why I became vegetarian. And the truth is, I can't really remember exactly why, but nutrition wasn't my first major. I was actually an English education major. I had 1 year of school left to go, doing my in-field internship to be an English teacher. And I was working for a friend of mine who is a nurse and owned a nursing agency, and I was doing some marketing for her. And I was always trying to bring nutrition. I was passionate about nutrition. I had just started this journey of let me give up meat and let me see how it how it goes. Let me give up my cheeseburgers. I always tell everybody this: cheeseburgers and bacon were my absolute favorite meats. I'm from Kentucky. One of my grandfathers had a farm with a lot of cattle on it and tobacco, just to throw that in too. And so anyway, it was actually a nurse who introduced me to the field of nutrition, because I was going back to that. I was at the office working one day, and one of the nurses came in and said, "You're always bringing healthy food in. Why don't you just think about, you should be a nutritionist?" And I'm like, "What's a nutritionist?" I had no idea what that was. But at that time, I had been biking a lot and just, giving up my cheeseburgers and bacon. And then it just morphed into pretty much all meat. That was 31 years ago. And I thought, well, let me just go I need another elective. Let me just go take a nutrition course. And that was a game changer. I just fell in love with nutrition, and I knew that was it. So I stopped my education in the English area, took a year off, and then restarted with prerequisites, which were completely different, as you can imagine, more the sciences, less of the arts with that. And that was it. And from then on, that's how I got into nutrition.
Nice. It was great that you really followed your passion, though, because somebody recognized that in you and commented on it. So I think that's really great. Today, we're focusing in on how nurses can incorporate lifestyle medicine into their practice at any level in any setting. And we want to know how you've worked with nurses in the past. Of course, you and I worked together quite a bit. Yes. With dietitians, I got to see you in action almost every day. And I was always just impressed by like how kind you were and non-judgmental, and really just did a really great job at honing in on what people needed.
Well, thank you.
And I feel like you and I talked together as colleagues at that time before we were, really friends. And that was a nice synergy we had. But we want to know how we can do this even more. So I do want to give you like a little setup, and so that we can go further in our conversation. So we feel like one of the sticking points or an area of opportunity within lifestyle medicine for nurses, and just generally in nursing practice, is education that we provide about nutrition. As a nurse, one of our key things that we do is patient education, and that does include nutrition, even going back a long time ago to the mother of nursing, Florence Nightingale, many years ago, when she advocated for nutrition and proper nourishment that was second only to the quality of air. And so we fast forward to today, when we have the second report from the National Academy of Medicine, and a report called the Future of Nursing 2020 to 2030 report, charting a path to achieve health equity, which really presents this urgent call to action for nurses to lead the way in this. And we all know that nutrition is key, and we want to explore a few aspects of this with you in particular. What I'd like to know from your experience, I know you've been in a variety of settings, how can nurses collaborate more synergistically with dietitians, whether it's inpatient, outpatient, in the community? We could even give examples of how we've worked together, but what do you think about that?
I think, well, I love working with other disciplines. And on a personal level, I have many friends who are nurses. Of course, you're one of them. And then, so I've worked, and I think it takes a team approach to make these changes. And as far as collaborating, I would love to see every healthcare setting have an actual interdisciplinary team. And I've worked in many different settings, like you've said, and or like you've mentioned, and some have more of an interdisciplinary team than others. And we all know that in healthcare now, sometimes the visits are only 15 minutes. We're in, we're out. There's a lot of things to talk about. But I firmly believe, and I say this all the time, and probably more than ever, the older I get, I'm just going to say it. I used to be embarrassed to say, I'm going to throw this out there. When I was starting to be plant-based, because I didn't say that 31 years ago, that was not widely accepted or I was actually called eccentric at one time. I was literally introduced as the vegetarian. This is my friend. She's a little eccentric. It wasn't really a good friend. Obviously, a good friend wouldn't say that, but I was introduced at a gathering as being eccentric. And I'm like, whoa. So even in the field of nutrition, what I found is 31 years ago, now it's a lot more mainstream. It was not then. So because of that, I downplayed the plant-based. And while I did it on a personal level and fully believed in it wasn't like I was out there telling everybody, hey, you need to eat tofu or something like that. I just wanted to throw that out there. So now I think that the more that we can just, I think sometimes my experience has been that we're afraid to, or maybe we'll think that, oh, this person's not going to change from, I don't know, eating fried foods to non-fried foods or something as basic as that. And I think sometimes it's been my experience that we think someone's not going to like it because maybe we didn't like it 15 years ago. So I think the more that we can just keep a really open mind, try to somehow, and I don't know what this would look like, Susie, but I would love to see team approaches in every clinic in town, every setting in town, and maybe a dietitian's not necessarily there, but one thing I think that would be beneficial, and we did this at my daughter's Montessori school when she was in elementary school, we partnered with the university. At that time, it was UNF. And we had a nutrition committee. So at the school, we had a nutrition committee. It was part of the PTA. I sat on the PTA. We had a nutrition committee with lots of different parents involved. We had nutrition students coming in. That's a great way to utilize things. As nutrition students, number one, we need hours. I was a nutrition student at one time, so we need to volunteer. And we're passionate. We want to get out there and we want to teach too. So I think that would be a really practical way to get more nutrition education into maybe settings that normally wouldn't. And utilizing things like this, Zoom or whatever it would be to do classes. Um, I don't know if that's something that you're looking for nursing wise, if that's the right answer, but I just think the more we can utilize resources that are out there. I know budgets are always an issue everywhere, always, it seems. So that would be a way that it would be financially feasible too.
Right.
I'll just go back to even like in the school, because what I found too, and I am passionate about childhood nutrition, is I found that when we start, the younger we start educating the kids, the better it's going to be. Because as adults, when I worked in pediatrics, for example, when we worked together, Susie, what I found was when I would do one-on-one with family, individual consults, it usually wasn't the child who was opposed to trying something new. I would have to tell the parents, okay, turn the TV off at dinner time. Let's go eat at the table. Let's try this vegetable. It sounds really basic, but what I have found over my years is starting with one change at a time. From a nursing perspective, if you're in a visit seeing a client and they drink a liter of soda every day, when I started out as a dietitian, I used to have 10 goals, and I do one. Once we get through that one, we go to the second one. And it might take 6 months, but we're going to get to finish the one goal, because because it takes a while for behavior modification. So I know that's all over the place. I'm sorry.
No, that's great.
Distracted.
No, that's great. You get on a roll.
I get on a roll. But I really think that from a practical standpoint, utilizing schools that have nutrition programs is a fabulous way to do it. Partner with them and get those into the different settings, even if it's doing video lessons, you can still do that. And what I found when we did that, we actually partnered with my daughter's elementary school, and we had the nutrition education students. I was actually had taught adjunct at UNF for about 9 years. And so we would have the nutrition students come in, and they would be responsible for a class and maybe teach 3 lessons. Now that can transfer over to adults too. It doesn't have to be just kids. We could teach adult classes or senior classes or any age group. But with kids in particular, what I found is they would send the message to their parents. And that's how the behavior changed. Because the other thing that I find is a lot of people don't know how to cook. And I don't mean that sarcastically. We're very confused in our society about nutrition because it's a big industry. So we have people writing nutrition books who have no background in health, definitely no background in nutrition. And so oftentimes my biggest hurdle is debunking all the myths. And then let's start with this. I spend a lot of time debunking myths, and this is with people that are well educated. These are with some of my personal friends even. I think maybe what I would like to see is somehow have some universal guidelines, basic nutrition guidelines that, for example, some people think, oh, carbs are horrible, so okay, I'm not going to eat fruit. A lot of people think that. I encounter that all the time. Oh, it's too much sugar in a banana, I can't eat that. I spend a lot of time in classes, even where I go now, because I'll do taste testings like in the populations I work with, or I'll make like the group homes will actually make healthy foods. We've made vegan pudding, we've made all kinds of things. And what I learned from that too is it's also educating the staff who's working with them. So I think the more we can reach everybody in whatever message, when you're seeing patients, if you're seeing patients, their caregiver might be with them, or maybe their spouse may be with them, or their children or their parents, keeping it simple and just basic.
I think that's key too, especially we've talked to even people in like at the bedside and they're really busy to try to get everything in there. So I think simple is a great thing to remember. And I do want to, I have a number of questions to ask you, but because you were talking about myths, what do you think some of the misconceptions about the practice of dietetics is, both in terms of the general public, but also your experience with nursing professionals? For instance, I watch a lot of things on YouTube, but I was listening to a dietitian talk about some of the misconceptions or things that she hears nurses saying to patients that may not be what she wants them to say to patients. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, have you had any experiences like that? Where and how could we make it so that we're all on the same page?
Yes, I've had many experiences like that. One of the biggest ones I'll tell you, and you both probably know, anybody in healthcare, that diabetes and prediabetes is rampant, right? And that's the biggest thing I encounter. If we can just, I know it sounds so simple, but I can't tell you how many educational handouts that I do or prepare to send to, and these are for other healthcare professionals too, about sugar and diabetes. That's one of the biggest. If I plan the menus at the different facilities, and oh, so and so can't have this because it has, it has sugar, it has starch, it has this. And sometimes it is nursing who may be saying that too, or someone with a health background. It's a variety of different people that have those misconceptions. So I think, I don't know, just the more education we can do about that, because I think, and maybe the other thing is too, is unless you're 100% sure of what the answer is, maybe just not verbalizing that until you check with someone who does know what the answer is, because I have encountered that multiple times with no, they can't have this, or no, they can't have that, or yes, they can have this. I'm like, what? No, that's not, nope, that's not okay. Especially as it relates to sugars. I'll go back to the carb. The carb myth is one of the biggest ones I encounter all the time, pretty much almost every day in some form or fashion.
Yeah. And I think that's where Deborah and I and you, I believe, are all members of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And that's how we have gotten a lot of additional education about nutrition, because nursing, we have to have nutrition as a prerequisite to a bachelor's degree, which is great. Physicians may get that much or less. Maybe it's more, it depends on where you go. But traditionally, a lot of us in these fields are not getting a lot of nutrition education. So I feel like the reversing diabetes course, understanding the physiology a little better than we did before, is really essential. And if nothing else, the bigger picture of staying up to date with evidence. There's 3,000 articles published every day about health. So being able to keep up with it all is a little bit difficult. What I do want to ask you about is that we feel that nurses at any level should be able to have that essential, basic, foundational education about nursing, being able to talk with people about switching their soda and about their fried foods and things like that. But what I want to ask you about is, like, where is the line in the sand? Can you tell us what medical nutrition therapy is when it comes to nurses giving nutrition guidance, which we can do, and education around this topic? Where do we say, okay, these are the red flags, this is when I really need a registered dietitian to step in and take over this? Are there calculations to do, or a certain level of chronic kidney disease, or what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think medical nutrition therapy is evidence-based. We have different protocols that we would follow, of course, and that's one of the things, not just related to nutrition, but in health in general. When I talk to patients, I love nurses, by the way. I could never do what you guys do. I couldn't. So my hat is off to you. There's a lot of things going on when we see patients these days or clients. Um, but medical nutrition therapy is evidence based. So, yeah, I think the line number one, anytime because I'm not a certified diabetes educator, of course, nurses can be CDEs, dietitians can be CDEs. So, I always recommend, even though I know how to calculate carbs for patients and things like that, I still recommend anybody I see who has diabetes who I think may benefit from a diabetes education class, because the insurance companies, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe they'll cover it, or at least a majority of it. I say I try to refer them out to that, like check with your endocrinologist, your primary care physician, your nurse practitioner, and see about getting a referral, because it's more comprehensive. So it's just, in my mind, it's just more education. It's all about education. You can't get too much of that, I don't think. And so I think that would be the kidney disease. Again, insurance usually covers a dietitian in that capacity too. So that would be whether they're pre-dialysis or not, they can still be seen by a dietitian. And I actually see individuals where I work now too that are also, maybe they go to dialysis, and I actually collaborate with the dietitian there because that's their specialty. I guess as a rule of thumb, I would think if someone's not completely sure, because again, what I experience, and we can't help but do this, we all have our own opinions, is sometimes it's just because we saw it on social media or we saw it on YouTube or we did Dr. Google, doesn't mean there could be more. It could be just something taken, it was in the news or it was in the magazine. It could be taken not in complete context, or there's more to it, or the bigger picture, that sort of thing. So I think if someone, and because you're asking specifically about nursing, if nursing's not really 100% sure about the answer, then maybe consult and it's nutrition related, consult the dietitian, consult the specialist in that area. I recommend all the time for people to go see a certified diabetes educator if they have diabetes, because it's just encompasses a lot more.
Yeah, that's great. You did note a couple of barriers, and I want to talk about some. So education, we know that's a big piece. What about, and the insurance coverage, you noted maybe diabetes and chronic kidney disease. And before we hopped on, we were all chatting about lack of insurance coverage. That can be a barrier, or patient perception, maybe a lack of understanding or appreciation by other healthcare professionals. And what could we do to break down some of those barriers? And just as a side note, when we used to work in a GI clinic, and I remember looking at our chief who was like on the edge of retirement, and I looked at him and I said, I think it comes down to what people put in their mouth. And he said, that's absolutely true. And most people are not ready to hear that. And I just thought, well, at least we should tell them. What are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree. And because you're right, I still work in settings and work with individuals who don't have the same, maybe I'm really passionate about nutrition. I am. And we're all passionate about different things. Some maybe nutrition, some not so much. And that's okay. We're all different. However, when we're working with patients, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of it has to do with what we put in our mouth. And I think the more maybe we could get from a nursing perspective, maybe we could get more dietitians educating healthcare professionals about what we do. I would love to do that. I love to do classes to talk about a certain topic of nutrition. There's so many things I do not know in health, but there are certain things that I feel like I could bring to the table with taste testings and trying to break some barriers, because I've had comments too from other healthcare professionals. Maybe they're not so positive at times, but I think the more I think education is the key. And I think the more we can educate other disciplines in what we do and what we can offer, or create handouts. We don't have to necessarily see everybody, but create handouts, or so that you could use them, nursing can use them in different settings, or have credible sites to go to. That's one of the big things I do. I like to give credible. And I always tell people these are credible. So don't just Google anything. Just because you can pull it up on the internet doesn't mean it's actually accurate. So giving people credible resources and having them accountable. And I agree with what you said about your previous conversation with the chief NGI. I think his comment is 100% spot on. Some people simply aren't ready to hear it. And being able to recognize that, because if we're trying to educate someone who's definitely not ready for it, it's not going to happen. They have to be ready for the change. But I do think we have the responsibility to at least give them the information.
Yes, I believe so too. Deborah, maybe I can turn it over to you. I know this is Stephanie, you're our first registered dietitian, so we're navigating through this, but
Okay.
Deborah she always beautifully pulls together the elements. Can I hand it to you for a second, Deborah, to see if there's anything?
Okay. Thank you, Susie and Stephanie. I was taking some notes there on all that you shared. And if we can step back through this new and quite extraordinary, the report coming out of the National Academy of Medicine is called The Future of Nursing 2020-2030, Charting a Path to Achieve Health Equity. And it is really informed by what happened with the COVID epidemic, where that tore back the curtain, shining a light on the social determinants of health and the health disparities, much based on people's economics, environment, zip code even. And it's charging nursing and everyone else involved, all other stakeholders, to support nurses in helping to move the needle, and even the word leading on addressing this really epidemic of chronic disease that we've now know unequivocally is largely connected to these social determinants of health. We believe, like you do, in the power of the team approach, that none of us can or do it alone, and should, that it's an integrative approach to this. And so we're wondering, given that, and this idea of nurses and nutrition, which was foundational to nursing back in the day of Florence Nightingale on forward. And then today's medical model, which is mostly prescription. So we're trying to change the medical model, but also empower nurses to work with colleagues within the highest practice within their scope and their education. Could we talk a little bit about how we as colleagues could have a synergistic relationship in moving the needle on evidence-based education for our patients, and really importantly, how we, in sharing this message in this platform here, can be very sensitive to our colleagues whose very essence is nutrition, registered dietitians, and we respect what all of you do so much. And I just want to share, that was my original degree, was in medical dietetics. So it's something I'm very aware of. Can we talk a little bit about all of that in our relationships as nurses and as registered dietitians?
Yes, absolutely. I love working with nurses. I have lots of friends who are nurses, nurse practitioners. And I think one of the best way, and I love to hear other healthcare professionals talking about nutrition. There is nothing that makes my heart, I'm like, oh, I love that. I just want to make, the thing is just making sure that it's correct information. And I think that comes from us being absolutely inundated on a daily basis. Like, I do this for a living, and sometimes I have to stop and think, wait a minute, that's not 100% accurate. Let me look it up. Am I wrong? I'm forever doing that. Maybe I'm always learning, and I learn from other people of the team all the time, every day. I'm always looking at medications or diagnoses or whatever it may be. But I think as far as working together because I guess what I'm hearing is a lot of it is for nursing, you want to do more of the nutrition part of it too, right? And giving more education. So I think to do that, maybe collaborating with a nutritionist or a registered dietitian in the area. And like, personally, I would be happy, and I've done it in the past, done free, not charged anybody for doing classes, whether it's, basic, using your air fryer kind of class. When I first got my air fryer, I was so intimidated, I didn't take it out of the box for 2 months. So when I shared that at cardiac rehab, when I was working there, the Ornish program, they're like, I don't know how to use mine either. And I'm like, but I just told them, I don't have a clue how to operate this. I am mechanically challenged. And then they opened up and they're like, we don't either. So we literally had a class on how to operate your air fryer. I think sometimes, and I've done this in the past, I think that, this is, maybe I won't share that I don't really know how to do that either, or I'm not really 100% sure. Let's just look it up together, or let's see what it says now. But I think collaborating with dietitians and nutritionists around in whatever area you're in is a good way to do it, and just partner. Most of my colleagues who are dietitians love the opportunity to be able to share information on certain topics. That's what we love to do for the most part. I'm speaking generally, but that's been my experience. We want to either debunk myths or show basic, simple guidelines for maybe different chronic diseases. And I think the more we can do that, and I would be happy to do a class with nurses, whether it's via Zoom, whether it's live, to just maybe come up with collaborative handouts that say, in a setting, you're seeing a patient who has type 2 diabetes, trying to reverse it. These are some simple bullet point steps to work on. I do think keeping it very simple, and that's what I do personally. I look back at my first time that I did a private consult, and I looked back and I thought, wow, I should have paid her for coming in here, because it was the worst visit ever. As I look back, I didn't have a child at that point, and I gave 20 recommendations. She was a new mom trying to lose weight, and I didn't keep it as real as maybe. I think I'm very realistic, and I try to meet people where they are, and also let them know we don't want to set people up for failure. And I try to look at that. And to me, that's huge. I want to empower people to feel like you can do this. You can operate your air fryer. I did it. Look, I know how to do at least one program, air fry. So keeping it really basic. Soda stream. I have a soda stream because I love carbonation. I don't drink sodas or diet sodas, but a lot of people who are trying to wean themselves. But at one time I did. I was drinking diet soda, and I think, oh my goodness, how I got on this kick. I do everything else, and yes, I'm drinking diet sodas, and I don't want to be drinking diet sodas. So I just switched to using carbonated, the fizzy water, I call it. So I teach people how to use a soda stream, or if they're drinking a lot of sodas or too many diet sodas, let's just switch to that. And I like hands-on. I'm very hands-on. I believe that's important too. We teach people how to do it, not just, I don't like to just talk about it. I like to actually show them how to do it too. And I think that's something that nurses could do, like a basic, how do you steam vegetables class versus the canned, or something like, something as basic. I know it sounds super basic, but believe me, people like that kind of stuff. Let's taste test it. People love food that they can taste, right? Susie and I have done a lot of things together collaboratively, and we've done the tofu. That's, I'm not saying everybody has to be plant-based, but teaching them how to do it. How do you marinate tofu? What in the world do you do with tempeh? But getting back to the basics, if you've got someone with hypertension and they're prescribed a low sodium diet, what does that mean? How do you do that? What I encounter a lot of times is people are given that information, they don't have a clue what 2-gram sodium diet does. Not so. Getting back to the basics, okay, bring some foods in, or have some foods in your setting, in your clinical setting. Have some labels to read and say, look, this is what this means, this is what that means. People love visuals. I have found that they really like that tangible. Sometimes I've had patients text me and say, I'm at the grocery store, this is the food label, what do you think? Perfect. Or look at the label, especially if they're on certain dietary restrictions. Maybe they're on low potassium with kidney disease or whatever it may be. I think that the more hands-on that we can be, and we're not necessarily always trained that way. We're trained and me too, to give the information. But what I find is a lot of people don't have a clue what that information means. Or if you see someone, which I'm sure you do, with 2 or 3 things going on, they're diabetic, they're on a low fat, low cholesterol diet, low sodium. Let's figure out that's overwhelming. That's overwhelming. If we know absolutely how to read food labels and how to cook it, it becomes really overwhelming. And I think sometimes people shut down. So trying to scale that back and think, what is the biggest thing? If their hemoglobin A1C is 10%, maybe we should focus on the diabetes first. Let's see what the diet looks like. Let's see where we can cut out those simple sugars, the carbs, manage that, and take it one step at a time. And as nurses, because you're doing the history, you can tell.
I have a question for you. So when we were at Nemours, I know that we had such a variety of patients, and some of them had a lot of money to do what they needed. But what about the folks that because we had a lot of underserved too, and a lot of developmentally disabled and like grandmas taking care of their kids or grandkids. What about being able to address some of those things with food? How do you approach, like, if people say eating healthy is too expensive? So I think addressing some of those social determinants of health, money is one, but so is access to food. So tell us how you've addressed that before.
That is a really good question. So I think one of the things is learning in our areas, because you're right, because there are food deserts. You're talking, Deborah, about the zip code. When I sat on, I used to be part of the Obesity Coalition and the Wellness Committee for Duval County in the school system. That was years ago. But one of the things we look at is those places that are, maybe they don't have access to transportation to the food, those food deserts or the foods are much more expensive. I like to tell people based on the area. I think it's important to know the area and what's available. That meaning, because I personally believe everybody can eat healthy and still keep it in a budget. It takes planning, though. That's the thing. And it takes those skills of knowing how to prepare the food. What do you do with it? What do you do with a kiwi? How do you eat it? I know this sounds so basic, but for example, like when my daughter was in Montessori, we did something called Munchie Monday, Tasty Tuesday. And we actually had it published in the medical journal. And I did it in conjunction with an English professor at UNF. She was the one, we spearheaded that. It went in the Duval County Medical Society. It was some years ago. We kept it going. I think it's still going on there, actually. And what we would do is we would go into the cafeteria at lunchtime. You can do this in any population. It happens to be at school. And we would be like waitresses, and we would have our vegetable or fruit of the day. And with that, they would get, so for example, if it was spinach, it would be fresh spinach presented maybe on an orange napkin. We eat with our eyes, presentation, and we wouldn't have dressing. And I'm getting back to answering your question too, Susie, but the exposure to what some of these foods are and what to do with them is also key. We would have them taste it. They could either try it, not try it, whatever they wanted to do, and attached with it to take home to their parents, or if we're working with adults, a handout for the adults about what is the food, what's the nutritional value, what do you do with it, how do you prepare it, something very simple, and leave it at that. For example, if we're trying to say, for example, people who live in maybe zip codes that don't have the same access or the same, we're all on a budget these days, right? Who isn't? Food costs is going crazy. It's skyrocketing. So learning places to be able to get those foods. So for example, I don't know if I should name names of actual places, but I tell people this is a place to go. Aldi's is a great place to go. Love Aldi's. They have great produce, organic, for if you want to buy some organic. Dollar Tree, Big Lots, places like that. I keep it very real, that if you want to go and look for some foods at places you wouldn't think and that might be nearby, those would be places you can go, in addition to maybe your local grocery stores or supermarkets. So I think one of the things would be, if nursing is teaching that, learning what the places are. If one time, and this was actually when I was in clinic, Susie, in GI clinic, and had a family come in, and I was talking to the young daughter. She was about 10, and I think her parents had actually, I'd been following her for a while, sat in the lobby. I was talking to her, and hey, how's your holiday going? It was for weight management, actually. And she said, we had a cookout. I'm like, a cookout? Okay, that sounds fun. The electricity had been turned off. So from that, I gathered from everything she was saying that the electricity was turned off. So learning where the food banks are. So I went out, got the parents, said, I actually contacted a social worker to find out if they knew some resources, but I did know how where the nearest food bank was. And most places have those food banks and they usually give healthy foods. So those are other resources that we can give to our clients as well as learning. That's why getting back to what to do with food, like the spinach with the taste testings, teaching people, even though we may think it, like we did taste testings one time of kiwi. And I actually had a couple teachers come up and say, we don't know what to do with the kiwi. And so we actually cut it in half. You can eat it with a spoon. Getting back to the basics is sometimes the best thing to do. Just when I see a client, regardless what the socioeconomic status is, education level, I start with the basics with everyone for knowledge. I don't just assume.
Susie, that was a great question. May I just circle back in here too about that theme that we're walking down here, which is about these disparities. And I one time heard a physician that's an expert in this field say, when it comes to healthy food and healthy lifestyle, pretty much no matter what, Americans overall are suffering from disparities. And Stephanie, you really poignantly share stories about all of that. Our children are not in the home economics classes anymore. They're not all being taught how to cook. And we're focusing in on nutrition today, very most importantly, because we're here with you and your expertise, but also the global burden of disease says the number one cause of death in the world is our diet. We see that our children are not being taught how to cook. Our families are stressed and they're not cooking and they're buying more and more. I think what's the percentages of processed food in the American diet is like 90% at this point. So it is a disparity that way in terms of what you importantly point out, which is exposure, skills, education. And that is the exposure to what is this food, the skills of what do I do with it, and then education about what it can do for us and how important it is. And that goes for all of us as clinicians. And outside of those of us that are lucky enough to have discovered this and be educated about it outside of kind of the standard curriculum until we hopefully in the near future, this will be the standard curriculum. But it sounds like a really beautiful collaboration would then be this idea of some classes that you and other dietitians might prepare for nurses and others about the how to, because as you said, we're trained in, no matter who we are or what the field is, we're trained in presenting evidence or the science and, okay, we need you to eat a low sodium diet with 2000 milligrams of sodium a day or 1500 milligrams. But then how does someone accomplish that? How to read labels? It sounds like this is a powerful starting point for going forward that you're so generously sharing that you would love to be involved in. So these are the kinds of collaborations that we're also looking to say, how can we work with our colleagues that are experts in these different fields? And how can we synergize the 1+1 is 5 here, coming out of this? And keeping the idea that keeping it simple, whether it be someone in a food desert and how to shop at an Aldi's or the corner bodega, whatever it is, where to find those foods, how to order in. Now we all have access to Amazon, how to order in dried beans and things like that in bulk, and how simple things, like you said, what to do with them, the crock pots, the Instant Pots, these appliances that are pretty very accessible now to people, and how to work with some of those things. And for if someone has the finances, maybe they don't have the time, or maybe they're stressed in both of those ways. So I just wanted to circle back to say, in so many ways, you're addressing all of that because this is lacking across the board at this point is that hands-on experience, the exposure to what is this? How do we do it? So I wanted to share about that. And thank you, Susie, for jumping in there on that.
Yeah, that's great. I know we've kept you for a while, Stephanie. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us, or anything else, especially as it relates to nurses and dietitians working together, and or even if we do like a setup for you, so we do some basic education and then refer somebody? Any other thoughts of things we haven't asked or things you thought of as we went along?
I can't think of anything. I'm just thrilled that I love working with nurses and other team members. And I think it does take all of us working with people. We live in a very stressful society. Let's face it. It's when I grew up, as far as it goes back to nutrition, and I try to tell patients that too, it's back to the basics, maybe what grandma said. You sit down at the table. I could get on a tangent with so many different topics as it relates to just eating behavior. One of the questions I asked, I'll just throw this out there. I know I could go on forever, but when I started working specifically with kids, and we're not trained to ask these, where do you eat? And I started asking, that's not like a textbook question I ever learned in a nutrition class, like, where do you eat? And I started, for different reasons, finding out that's something I needed to ask. And I would say, where are you eating? There's so many people that what I found, I don't know the percentages or the statistic, but my experience is a lot of people just sit in front of the TV and watch it. There's not that, like when I was growing up, and I'm like, wow, I'm really old school. I'm old because we had to sit at the table. We didn't talk on the phone. We didn't have cell phones, and that's not the case anymore. So that's one of the things I go back to, as basic as it sounds. Let's make eating less stressful too. Let's sit at the table. Let's talk. Let's turn the TV off. No cell phones. That was the rule at my house. My daughter knew, her friends knew, cell phones they go bye-bye at mealtime. But I love working with nurses. I'm so grateful that you're so passionate. I love it when I get texts from you, Susie, and you ask nutrition questions. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not passionate enough anymore, but I really, I just think that so many of these conditions we can reverse with, of course, diet. I always say that. I was doing an education the other day, and as I've said, it's the longer I've been doing this and the older I get, I don't like hold back as much anymore. And I was doing an orientation. It was for healthcare. They actually, none of them were nurses in that class, but I'm like, food is medicine. And they're like looking at me. I'm like, no, food is medicine. And they went along with it. They're probably like, whatever. But I think the more we can approach it that way, I say that to everybody, and I firmly believe it. But it's really, there is, I think we just don't have those skills. Like you said, Deborah, there's no home ec. Heck, a lot of people aren't taking home ec classes. We just getting back to the basic skills.
And we're having generations now. My mom was in the kitchen, but I wasn't so much when my kids were growing up because I was so busy. So we're losing those kitchen skills. I think that maybe grandma or great grandma had, or the men too. I'm not nothing to say against the men. And what you were pointing to when you're talking about asking where you eat and making it less stressful, I think it really comes down to being much more mindful around our food and the experience of eating.
Absolutely, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an important piece that for me, I want to bring more into. And I have a friend who's a physician, a plant-based physician, and she uses a whole food plant-based diet combined with mindful eating to really help people with that behavior change. And I love that piece. I'm glad you said that at the end because we didn't ask about that. So I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you. I do think it's a huge piece too, because the science is, if we think we can multitask and do 5 things at one time, but we're not able to do it so well. Even like when we were working together at Nemours, the 5-2-1 almost none, meaning 2 hours or less of screen time a day. That's everything screen time. So, if I'm sitting here and I'm watching TV or I'm talking to you and I'm eating, that means I'm not paying attention to my hunger and satiety cues. So I'm probably going to eat more. And when we eat really fast, so I've actually done classes on just mindful eating. And when I worked with the Ornish program with the plant-based nutrition, we taught at least one session on that. Usually we had a couple because we do little homework assignments and challenges and things like that. That's one thing too that I find that kind of the last thing is when you're working with clients, I found that they like little nutrition. I call it homework. And even the adults like the homework or the challenge. Like, let's see if you can, you know, I know that you've done this before too, Susie, with, the taste bud rehab, which is something we should address too. But oftentimes it takes more than a 15 or 30-minute visit and more than one session. They have to follow up. So, I would say that for nursing, if and pretty much in any setting you can do this except for like maybe an inpatient, because I think that inpatient in the hospitals, and it's been several years since I worked as an inpatient hospital dietitian, but people are in and out and they're focused on so much more than that. If someone's just had a heart attack, they're probably still focusing on that and maybe not their low sodium, low fat diet. And what I would find is sometimes if I saw someone inpatient and then outpatient, they didn't even remember half of what we said. And it wasn't that they didn't care. It was that wasn't their priority at that time. So I think the more we can do community-based education collaboratively with hands-on components, with different topics, I think that would be the way to do it. And offer some via Zoom for people who maybe, can't or don't want to drive to wherever the actual physical location is. I've done actual nutrition cooking sessions via Zoom. And the reason I did that is because during the pandemic, I signed up for one. There was a lady in Jacksonville. She's wonderful. She's from Italy. She does Italian cooking classes. So with a couple of our friends, we paid our fee and we got online. We bought our own ingredients and we had a Zoom learning to make your own. I think it was ravioli. I can't remember now, but it was, a class. So I thought, oh, that actually went pretty well. I think I can do this with how do you make tofu? But we could do with anything. So I think that is one maybe silver lining, if you want to say there is any silver lining to what we learned from going through the lockdown, is basically we can utilize things like Zoom and
using
technology. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Stephanie, for all of the information today. And I will wrap my section up. Deborah, do you have anything else that you want to ask?
I would just love to just circle back because I always cautious in trying to expand the conversation or have a broader brushstroke about something like the social determinants of health. And the comment that I heard that I thought really elucidated the fact that all of our children and really so many Americans are not getting the information, even in that there are the disparities because we're not getting the education, the true education about the evidence base of nutrition and these chronic diseases. But I just want to reemphasize that is at an entirely different level than what so many Americans are facing that are living in poverty, in underserved communities, with so many disparities beyond just that, oh, I'm not getting the evidence-based nutrition. So I just want to make sure that I emphasize that and maybe restate that to go along with what I was saying, to say there's so much that there are so many opportunities that everyone needs to learn about, including as clinicians, what we're all about here. But that there is no comparison to what so many of our neighbors and other Americans in different communities, neighboring communities, are facing in terms of eating and living and healthy lives and being able to basically what the World Health Organization calls the right to health, the basic fundamental right to health, which nursing has adopted in the code of ethics. So just wanted to just go back and clarify that. And also to restate that the kinds of things you're describing, Stephanie, are so fun and so fundamental that bring people together with classes, with cooking. And so it serves those needs of connection and learning and community. So it's a multifaceted win when we come together. And I know I speak for Susie and I that we're both so appreciative of your message about working together and also sharing your expertise with nurses. And I hope we can take you up on some of that too as part of the project.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me talk to you. I really appreciate it. And as far as the social aspect, I'll just close with this with one of the things because I think we try to show love with food. And so one of the things I always say, because typically it's not the healthiest food. So one of the things I always told my daughter growing up is I love you and that's why I'd love to see you eat the broccoli. That's why I want you to have the broccoli, the vegetable. And I think it's the way we think about food that is another whole topic in and of itself.
Oh, yes. There's so many directions we could go. And it's cultural too. And that was another thing. Yeah, I was going to point out when I was watching Stephanie in action many times at Nemours, she was attuned to the cultural aspect of people and their diets and their food. And that was a learning lesson for me is I have my own perspective, but I learned from her, which you probably didn't even realize, Stephanie, at the time, about how different people from different cultures have their things that they like and the typical ways of eating, and how we can use that and embrace those ways, but up level them in a healthier way. So that was also something that I learned some years ago. So I appreciate that.